The child's arms wrapped around her legs with the kind of certainty only children have. "That's her, Daddy," he said, eyes shining, voice filled with something so simple it shattered every illusion the man had built around himself. The words didn't echo because the world seemed to pause for them. Just those 4 syllables, like keys unlocking 1,000 locked memories. The woman knelt slowly. Her uniform was plain, worn at the knees, and her hands trembled slightly as they touched the boy's back. She didn't speak. Her breath caught in her throat. The man who stood behind his son, CEO of one of the most powerful firms in the country, was suddenly unsure how to breathe. He had faced boardrooms with billion-dollar deals at stake. He had buried a wife, raised a son, kept his empire afloat while the ground beneath him cracked with grief. But in this moment, watching his child wrap himself around the waist of the janitor, he was a man with no script, no defense, no answers. The boy looked back at him. "She sings the song Mommy used to sing. The one about the stars." The man stepped forward. He didn't feel the gravel beneath his shoes or the wind pulling at his coat. His fingers twitched as if reaching for something he didn't understand. His eyes locked with hers. She blinked once. Twice. Then slowly stood. Her face was tired, softer than he remembered. The years had sculpted something quiet into her. Her eyes held storms and stillness at once. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. He looked at the child, then back to her. Something in his gaze cracked. "Who are you?" She flinched. It wasn't the question itself, but the way he asked it, like he had known her once and forgotten her so completely that the forgetting had become an erasure. Like she was just another stranger in a city of shadows. From her coat pocket, something fell. A folded piece of paper. The child bent to pick it up, holding it up with pride. The man reached for it but paused. The woman took it gently, unfolded it. A drawing. Crude, done in crayons. A woman with long hair. A boy. A man in a suit with a tie. And above them, scrawled in a child's careful hand, 3 words, "Our real family." The man inhaled sharply. She tucked the drawing away again. Her voice, when it finally came, was low. "Fragile. He remembers more than you do." The man staggered back a step. His knees nearly buckled. The world had just shifted under his feet. Rain had started to fall. It was gentle at first. Then steadier. The child reached for his mother's hand. The man didn't move. Not yet. Something deeper than memory stirred behind his eyes. A flicker. A fracture. Then, a name. Her name. He whispered it. And she didn't deny it. His hand moved toward her, then froze. 6 years ago, that same hand had signed a dismissal. A rejection letter. A cold decision backed by logic and ego. He hadn't known her then. Not really. Not until after. But now, under gray skies and between the hands of a child, the pieces began to fit. He closed his eyes. Rain slicked his hair, but he didn't care. His voice cracked as he said, "Tell me everything I missed." Her lips parted. And the story began. 6 years earlier, before any whispers of motherhood or confessions shattered the air, before a child ever tugged on a sleeve and called a stranger, "Daddy," the world was cold in a different way. It wasn't the chill of winter or rejection, not yet. It was the sterile cold of glass offices, schedules, and the hollow echoes of high heels across marble floors. Alexander Vail, then a 40-year-old widowed CEO of Vail Tech, had just closed his 3rd acquisition that quarter. The market adored him. Investors praised his ruthlessness. Yet every photo from every gala, every interview, every glossy profile piece, carried the same undercurrent in his eyes, something missing. It was on a Wednesday evening that the boardroom lights first dimmed a little earlier than usual. A system glitch, the tech team later said. Alexander didn't mind. He liked the silence. While most executives departed before nightfall, he preferred staying late, claiming it gave him clarity. In truth, it kept him away from a penthouse echoing with old piano recordings and the scent of lavender that lingered long after his wife's funeral. That evening, a faint sound broke the silence, a rhythmic brushing, like cloth against tile. He turned toward the glass wall and caught a blur of movement. A woman, small-framed, dark-haired, bent over with a mop and bucket. Her uniform was navy. Nothing about her stood out, except for the care in her movements, the way she paused before scrubbing the corners, as if those corners mattered more than the center. He didn't speak. She didn't notice him. Or if she did, she gave no indication. Instead, she moved on to the trash bins, emptying them one by one. From his vantage point, he saw her pause at the edge of the long conference table, pull out a crumpled sheet of paper, glance at it, then tuck it away. Something about her posture shifted in that moment, the way a person stands when reminded of who they used to be. Days passed. She returned, always at the same time. Always with the same silence, the same grace. Sometimes she hummed under her breath, low melodies that didn't belong to any pop song he knew. One night, he left a file on the edge of the table, a marketing draft riddled with inconsistencies he was too tired to fix. The next morning, the file returned to his desk. Annotated. Improved. No signature. Alexander said nothing. But he started leaving drafts more often. Meanwhile, across the city in a worn-out apartment, Lena Ruiz dried her son's hair with an old towel. The boy, no older than 3, laughed as she tickled him and asked for another bedtime story. She gave him a kiss on the forehead, then opened the notebook she always carried, the same notebook where she once sketched ideas for corporate brand repositioning. Once, before layoffs. Before complications. Before she had to choose between staying in boardrooms or giving birth alone. She worked as a night cleaner now. Not out of defeat, but because it was the one job that let her earn just enough to buy diapers while still being home in the mornings. She wore no makeup. No heels. Her name tag didn't mention the 3 languages she spoke or the fact that she used to design multi-million-dollar pitch decks. And yet, every night, in that silent glass kingdom of veil tech, a sliver of her old self peeked out. Back in the office, the whispers began. One of the VPs noticed the annotated files. Another claimed Alexander was losing focus, too invested in phantom analysts. But Alexander never corrected them. Not because he wanted to protect Lena, whom he didn't even know by name, but because some small part of him liked the mystery. Liked not knowing. Until one evening, just past midnight, he stayed later than usual. A storm had knocked out power in parts of the city, and the backup generators bathed the building in a strange, amber glow. Lena entered as usual, unaware he was still there. She moved to the far side of the room, humming softly, her hair slightly damp from the rain. Alexander watched from the shadows until his phone vibrated, a call he ignored. When she turned and saw him, she froze. I didn't realize anyone was still here, she said quickly, adjusting her gloves. He stood. You annotated my files. Lena stiffened. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to overstep. I just saw a few inconsistencies and... They were good suggestions, he interrupted. Silence stretched between them, awkward yet intimate. What's your name? He finally asked. She hesitated. Lena. He nodded. Lena, do you miss it? Miss what? Being the one who led, instead of the one who cleaned up after everyone else. Her lips parted slightly. She didn't answer. Just looked at him with the kind of expression that held years of sacrifice behind it. There's a position opening, he said, almost to himself. Nothing grand, just a consultancy role. Temporary. But you seem to have an eye for strategy. I can't, she replied. Not because I don't want to. But I have a son. And this job has hours that let me be home for him. He nodded, as if he understood, even though his own son lived in boarding school and barely called. Then what if you did both? Part-time. Remote when possible. We can work around it. Why would you do that? She asked. Because, someone once told me that a good leader doesn't just recognize potential. They protect it. It was the first real conversation they ever had. Not long. Not emotional. But it stayed with them both. And so it began. Quietly, without announcement or fanfare. Lena started working nights, not just cleaning, but reviewing internal drafts, providing feedback under the pseudonym L.R. She never attended meetings. Never signed memos. But her insights began shaping campaigns, redirecting projects. Her presence invisible, yet undeniable. Until the day a junior exec, seeking credit, submitted her annotated version of a failed campaign as his own. And when it succeeded, when shareholders applauded the sudden turnaround, Alexander didn't speak. He merely watched Lena that evening as she swept the corridor. Her eyes downcast. Her hands slower. "You knew," she said quietly when he passed. "Yes. And you let it happen." He didn't deny it. Would it have changed the outcome? She looked at him, then turned away. "For me?" "Yes." The next day, she didn't come to work. He checked the schedules. Called maintenance. No one knew where she went. And it wasn't until a week later, when his son returned from a rare visit and showed him a crayon drawing of my school friend's mom, that Alexander's heart skipped. In the sketch, the woman had dark hair. A small smile. And a bracelet with a familiar charm. "Who is this?" he asked. "That's her, Daddy." His son pointed. "She always brings juice and cookies when we play. She says she used to know you." Alexander felt his breath hitch. The bracelet in the drawing was unmistakable. And in that moment, everything he'd ignored, avoided, and left unsaid over the years flooded in. A child's innocence had drawn a truth too deep for boardrooms or strategy decks. He stood silently, staring at the paper, unsure whether to cry or run. His son looked up, confused. "Daddy? What's wrong?" Alexander knelt, pulled the boy into a hug, and whispered, "Nothing, son. Just, remembering someone I should never have forgotten." Outside, the city lights flickered. But inside him, something had just turned on, a memory. A promise. And perhaps, the start of redemption. Because sometimes, the biggest truths don't arrive with fanfare. They come from a crayon drawing, and the quiet voice of a child who just knew. And that was when Alexander Vale began to remember Lena Ruiz. Not the janitor. Not the strategist. But the woman who had once believed in something long before he learned how to. Part 3. The rain had not yet stopped when Nathaniel Blackwood stood alone in his corner office, the city below veiled in a curtain of gray. The thunder had moved on, but its echo still lingered in his chest. The pen in his hand no longer wrote, it simply trembled between his fingers. On his desk, two objects lay like twin shards of a forgotten mirror, a photo of a woman drenched in rain with a child in her arms, and a crumpled resume bearing the name he hadn't heard in years, Elena Vale. She was the reason the boy had said it. "That's her, Daddy." 3 words that shattered the illusion of control he had so carefully built. And now, as the night deepened around him, Nathaniel let the truth take shape like fog congealing into a figure. He remembered everything. It had been nearly 7 years since the charity gala where he first met Elena. She wasn't an invited guest. She wasn't even supposed to be there. She was working as temporary staff, refilling glasses and collecting empty plates, unnoticed by the crowd of donors in sequin gowns and hand-tailored tuxedos. But Nathaniel had noticed her. Not for her looks, though they were striking, but for her silence in a sea of noise. She had carried herself like someone who once knew how to speak in rooms that listened. He had found her by accident in the garden behind the ballroom, taking a brief break. She had removed her apron and sat cross-legged on the stone bench, gazing up at the moon like it was the only real thing in her world. He'd joined her without thinking. Their conversation had begun as small talk, weather, wine, work hours, but slowly unraveled into something deeper. She never told him her full name. He never asked. But she had said something he never forgot: sometimes the best thing you can do for a dream is let it rest a while, just until it remembers how to breathe again. They met again. Once. Twice. Then it became a pattern. Every Friday evening, behind the ballroom or beside the staff entrance, they'd share 15 minutes that felt like lifetimes. He brought her tea, she brought him honesty. She had opinions about his company, ideas he had never heard from boardrooms full of yes men. One night, she gave him a folded sheet of paper. "Don't open it now," she'd said. "Open it when you're ready to hear something true." He never opened it. Not then. Not even after she stopped coming. One Friday she just didn't appear. The next, he waited. By the third, he convinced himself it hadn't mattered. By the fourth, he threw the unopened note into his desk drawer and never looked at it again. Until now. The seal was brittle. The paper yellowed. Inside was a strategic analysis more comprehensive than anything his team had produced in years. At the bottom was her full name, Elena Vale, with credentials that made his heart sink. She hadn't just been brilliant, she had been someone. Someone his company should have hired. Someone he had allowed to disappear without question. In the following days, Nathaniel became a ghost in his own building. He wandered hallways looking not for her, but for echoes. The janitorial staff avoided his gaze. HR had no record of her. It was as if she had never existed within the building, and yet somehow, she was everywhere. The numbers she had predicted, now manifesting. The shifts in public perception she had warned about, already underway. And then the envelope arrived. No name, just a white envelope slid beneath his office door. Inside, a single photograph. A boy with his head resting on a woman's lap, asleep on a park bench. The woman's face was turned, but he knew the silhouette. He had seen her in moonlight and memory. The next morning, Nathaniel drove without a destination. He followed instinct, not maps. It led him to the industrial quarter, where a soup kitchen served silent lines of people and volunteers moved like clockwork. And there she was, not with a mop or a tray, but on her knees, cleaning a child's scraped elbow with the same tenderness she once reserved for thoughts. He didn't approach. Not yet. He returned the next day. Then the day after. He learned her routine without interrupting it. Watched how others deferred to her, how she answered not with authority but with assurance. She was no longer hiding. She was rebuilding. But not for herself. For the boy. And that boy, the one who clung to her hand with unquestioning faith, had the same eyes as Nathaniel. Eyes that scanned and calculated, that held storms behind their calm. The boy's name was Sam. And Sam had a sketchbook. It was that sketchbook that finally ended the silence. On a rainy Thursday, Sam ran into Nathaniel at a bookstore near the shelter. Elena was running late, and the boy had wandered in for warmth. Nathaniel offered him cocoa, unsure whether he should introduce himself. But Sam spoke first. "You look like the man in my picture," he said. Then he pulled out his sketchbook. The drawing was simple, done in crayon and pencil. A tall man with a pen in his pocket and a woman sitting on a bench. Between them, a child. All holding hands. Nathaniel couldn't breathe. "That's her, Daddy," Sam said, pointing to the woman. "That's my mom." The truth hit like a train. It wasn't just that Elena had disappeared. It was that she had been erased, by choice, by pain, by a world too blind to see her worth. And he had been complicit. In his silence. In his forgetfulness. In his fear. That night, Nathaniel sat in the parking lot of the bookstore until the last light inside flickered out. He didn't follow Sam. He didn't knock on any doors. Instead, he returned to his office and retrieved the old pen she once admired during one of their secret talks. It no longer wrote, but tonight it would. He drafted a letter. Not of apology, but of acknowledgement. Not asking to return, but asking to be allowed to listen. I don't expect forgiveness. But if Sam ever asks where he got his eyes, I want to be someone he can remember without shame. He left the letter in the same white envelope, addressed only with her name, and placed it at the front desk of the shelter. And still, for weeks, there was no reply. Not until that fateful morning, in the park where Sam often played, when the boy ran up to him with open arms and said it again. "That's her, Daddy." Nathaniel turned. And Elena was there. Not walking toward him. Just standing still. She stood still, watching the little boy run with his oversized backpack bouncing against his small frame. The schoolyard was busy with parents picking up their children, laughter filling the late afternoon air. Her hands tightened slightly on the paper bag she carried, a modest lunch she always prepared, even though she wasn't allowed on school grounds without a visitor's badge. From the other side of the chain-link fence, she observed quietly. Not every mother gets to wave openly. Ethan turned, as if sensing something. His gaze locked onto hers across the playground. For a second, the noise around them faded. His eyes, those unmistakable eyes, widened, and then without hesitation, he shouted, "Daddy. It's her. That's her." He pointed, his tiny voice rising above the others. Halston Lancaster, still holding the hand of a teacher he had been speaking with, turned quickly. The moment his eyes landed on Ariel, the world came to a halt. He didn't blink. The last time he saw her, she had disappeared into the fog of silence, leaving behind nothing but a folded piece of paper and a child's drawing. Now she was here. She didn't move. Not when Ethan ran toward the fence, not when Halston followed. She only blinked once, slowly, as if trying to convince herself that this wasn't another version of a dream she'd forced herself to forget. She felt the pull in her chest, old pain mixed with something tender and terrified. Halston approached with measured steps, his breath caught between caution and disbelief. He looked down at Ethan, who was jumping with excitement, pointing again, "That's Mommy. Daddy, you said you lost her, but she was here. She was here the whole time." Ariel's knees nearly buckled. She had prepared herself for many outcomes, but not this, not a child claiming her without hesitation, not Halston looking at her like he'd never stopped searching, like time hadn't built all those walls between them. He spoke first, his voice low but trembling. "You came back." She couldn't find her voice. The words she rehearsed so many times dissolved on her tongue. So she nodded, once, just enough. "I didn't know how to find you," he said. I thought I lost everything." She finally spoke. "You didn't lose everything. He's here. He's yours." Halston knelt beside Ethan, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. He looked up again. "And you? Are you still mine?" The question lingered, fragile and exposed. The past between them had been filled with omissions, with silence louder than screams, with nights she cried in empty rooms, and years he spent believing she had walked away by choice. But none of that mattered now. Not in this playground. Not in the glow of a child who had waited for a father he had never met properly. She stepped forward, close enough for the wind to carry her scent, the same lavender and cedarwood he remembered. Her eyes glistened. "I never stopped loving you, Hal. But I stopped believing you could love someone like me, when I was no longer the strategist with perfect graphs and confident speeches. When I was just the janitor." His jaw tightened. "That was never why I loved you. I was the one who forgot what mattered." Ariel smiled, gently, not fully but enough to break something open between them. Maybe we both forgot. Maybe that's why we had to start over. Ethan tugged at Halston's sleeve. Can she come home with us now? Can we be a family today? Neither adult answered immediately. The weight of that question was more than just a child's wish. It was a doorway, an offering, a fragile hope that couldn't survive unless both of them stepped into it together. Halston stood. Let's walk. Just us. No lawyers. No past. Just now. They walked the length of the fence until they reached the gate. Ariel followed, slowly, her breath uneven. The gate creaked open, and for the first time in years, she crossed it not as a shadow, not as someone cleaning the halls after hours, but as herself, Ariel Quinn. Ethan grabbed her hand with no hesitation, swinging it between them. She looked down, and her heart cracked wide open. The way he held her hand, it wasn't fear or formality. It was instinct, like something in him always knew. They walked through the park across from the school. Sunlight filtered through golden leaves, and Ariel couldn't help but glance at Halston. His hair was a little more silver, his eyes more lined, but he walked like a man who was no longer carrying shame alone. He turned to her. I kept everything you ever left behind. The pen. The resume. Even the drawing Ethan made. She blinked back tears. I left those behind because I thought you'd thrown me away. I didn't. I just didn't know how to look for you properly. Until he came along. Until his eyes reminded me of you. They sat on a bench, the three of them. A quiet moment, unannounced but complete. Halston leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We don't have to name anything yet. But I need you to know, you were never invisible. Not to me. Not really. I just wasn't brave enough to face what I didn't understand. Ariel touched his shoulder. I never needed you to be perfect. Just honest. Just here. Ethan placed a dandelion in her lap. Make a wish, Mommy. She smiled, tears falling now without shame. I already have everything I wished for. They stayed until the sun dipped low and the schoolyard emptied. No announcements. No vows. Just three people, sitting close, beginning something that felt like a second first time. Later that evening, Halston drove them in silence toward the edge of the city. The air smelled of autumn and possibility. Ariel looked back at Ethan sleeping in the back seat, his mouth slightly open, hands still clutching a crayon drawing he wouldn't let go. She reached out and laid her hand gently over Halston's on the gear shift. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Sometimes, forgiveness doesn't come in words. It comes in staying. In walking side by side. In building a life slowly, like cleaning a floor that everyone else has walked over, until it finally shines again. And in that quiet drive home, they weren't janitor and CEO. They were just people, choosing to begin.